It's a great pleasure to be with you all here today. I know on behalf of my fellow panelists, I think it's a bit weird. I think it's fair to say we may be a bit rusty to start with because we're not used to interacting with humans. I speak for everyone, I think, when I say that. So this afternoon we're going to be exploring how the world's biggest companies are collaborating with climate tech startups. And as you can appreciate, that's a fairly sizable topic and a pretty relevant one now, given the scale of the challenge that faces us in all getting to net zero by 2050 or arguably earlier. And I think it's only through multi-stakeholder partnerships that we'll be able to deliver what's necessary on the right timeline against climate change. And the private sector's got a huge role to play, and the tech community, in my humble opinion, probably has a bigger role to play than most. And I know that's where a lot of you come from. And if you thought that as a society we're already doing lots in this area, I think today's news, I know we've heard, I've only been here for a little while, but a lot of the discussions have been quite optimistic. When I woke up this morning and turned on Radio 4, you will have heard the new Climate Change Committee report that came out today, which says that key UK industries ranging from housing to power aren't remotely ready for a 2 degree, for anything approaching a 2 degree world, let alone anything hotter. And by the way, the projections look like it's going to be hotter than that. So there's lots that needs to be done, both from a mitigation and an adaptation perspective. We've only got 30 minutes to tackle that topic today. That's the bad news. The good news is we've got a fantastic supersonic panel for you this afternoon who've got some great insights. I'm going to be very swift in the introductions and then we'll crack straight on with it. First up, we've got Leo Johnson. He is a partner at PwC where he leads their disruption practice, which sounds very exciting. And he also co-presents the Radio 4 series Future Proofing. Next up, we have Maggie Buggy, who is the Senior Vice President, Chief Business Officer, SAP Services. She leads a business unit whose purpose it is to create value for SAP customers, helping them to build their future business through the lens of sustainability. Then we have George Bridges, Lord Bridges, who is an advisor on responsible banking at Santander and a senior advisor to Anna Botan, who is the group executive chairman there. And finally, but not least, we have Steve Varley, who I think we should give a round of applause to for being the only man I think I've seen so far who's been brave enough to wear a pair of shorts. So give it up to Steve. He is the Global Vice Chair of Sustainability at EY, leading their climate and sustainability efforts globally. But perhaps more importantly than that, he is the co-chair of the S30 together with me. So welcome, everyone. Let's start with Leo, and let's start disruptively, given that's in your job title, by questioning the question that we've been given. So forgetting about the how for a second, in your view, why are the world's biggest companies so keen to collaborate with companies of the types represented in this room here, and is this bit little and large becoming a real thing?
Okay, so let me question your question of the question.
Do it.
Yeah, are they, for a start?
Don't know.
And I would say if you are a startup and you want to collaborate with some big beast of a company, you probably want to be eyeballing that CEO and asking what's in it for them, what's their motivation. And I think you could say that there's maybe going to be some where what they're feeling is some sort of romance. There's some sort of love for what you're offering. There's some sort of desire to up their brand, to up their employee motivation, to get a great comm story. And what's going to happen to you probably, you're probably going to get buried in some silo in the organization and die a slow, horrible death, okay? But you'll have made a CEO briefly feel good. Then I think there's another group where it's not kind of the love thing that's going on, it's more the desperation thing going on, which is their business is tanking. And they look at you and think, maybe you are the exit route. Maybe you're the way out of this. Maybe you're going to come up with a new narrative for the investor community. Maybe you might even transform their business model. But probably, if they're really in that boat, it's going to be too late and they won't have the cash and it'll be a stressed environment and it'll be really hard to make that transition work using what you are bringing to them as a startup. I don't want to end on this gloomy note. I think there is also a third category. There's a third category, which is there might be some CEOs where it's not kind of love, it's not desperation. Maybe actually there's a strategy that's going on. Maybe they can see there's a burning platform. Maybe they can see there's a business necessity to start integrating what you've got. And I think if there's one thing you want to look for, it's the CEOs that have got that. And something that, as sort of heading up the disruption innovation stuff and the new net zero innovation program, what we're trying to do is find the sexiest, best stuff that really is game changing, that's not just going to be buried in some corner, and then plug them together, Tinder style, with the CEOs that actually want to do something and make those corporate collaborations work. But let me stop there.
Excellent. So let's put the burning platform stuff to one side for a second and focus on the sexy stuff, to use your language there. So part of your role at SAP, Maggie, is to work with clients to help them build businesses that make a real contribution to some of the sustainability challenges that we face, including climate. Getting specific for a minute, can you share with us some examples, one example, a few examples of the good stuff?
No problem. I'll talk about the third way, although I have to say I do recognise
Tony Blair had that catchphrase, didn't he?
Oh no, really put me up for Tony. Okay, no, but I can indeed, Arlo, because really customers are coming to us to do this for two reasons, and we want to do it for two reasons. Number one, they're coming to us because they see a business opportunity, an opportunity for joint value creation, because what we're living through at the moment, and more of our customers in every single industry are realising that what we're at the start of is a complete restructuring of how value is defined, how it is measured, and how it is distributed. And if I pick one of the examples that is becoming one of our most successful ones, but started very much within our startup incubator, is a company called Green Token. And this was about how to address the problem of traceability, because as I'm sure many people in this room know, every consumer-facing industry, particularly consumer products and retail, are having serious problems with consumers holding them to account for the end-to-end traceability of the materials that are in the things that we're buying on the virtual or physical supermarket shelves. And what Green Token did was working with farmers and plants in Indonesia, started to focus on palm oil traceability, and also using distributed ledger technology and blockchain as a service to be able to distinguish between sustainable and non-sustainable materials, and to create secure tokens that could then be applied right throughout a secure value chain, and also help the brands that were in that broader ecosystem and value chain to be able to address the share of mind question that was growing in their end consumers' minds. And now, such has been the success of that and the pickup within its original inception in the context of traceability for palm oil, it's now been expanded to other commodities such as soybean, and now the next phase is all around polymers. And that has brought all the big energy companies into that same ecosystem. And that is kind of the interesting point that we learned through the process is, number one, we definitely learned lots about how not to murder innovation. As a German software company, we're really good at processes, and sometimes those processes need a little bit of a reshape to ensure that we don't stymie fresh thinking and creativity before we come in with, okay, how do we commercialize it and engineer it at scale? But the interesting thing we did learn is that so many things within this space of race to net zero and around the future value opportunity is around modular capability that can be used in the context of multiple customer experiences, human experiences, business outcomes, and also within platforms and data models.
Excellent. Sounds like an amazing example.
Told you.
It sort of came up in there was an agriculture panel or food panel earlier where they were talking about ingredients, and the lady Camilla, I think it was, Fayed, was questioning what was actually inside some of those things, and I think it's going to be a real issue going forward, how customers are able to connect with the sustainability story that's behind whatever that company is doing. Customers is an interesting point, an interesting leverage point perhaps for us to talk about, George. So when we talk about tech, in common parlance, often we're talking about not just technology, but the business model that has become dominant, that's emerged from Silicon Valley, which is all around customer centricity. Can you give maybe some examples about how Santander is working with customers to make progress on the climate agenda?
I mean, I'd love to say, in response to Leo's characterisation, we're obviously in your third camp, but actually, genuinely, I do think you say that this is sort of novel. You know, Silicon Valley have come up with this concept of customer centricity. I mean, I think anyone in this room who started a business, I used to run a very small business, you have to be customer centric. It's good. That's the way you live or die. You have to be customer centric. We have 148 million customers across the world in 10 markets, and for us, faced with, on the one hand, the digital revolution powering this way and the green revolution coming upon us, if we're going to win their loyalty in that environment where they have so much more choice than ever before from not just other banks but other digital companies offering financial services, we have to be completely customer focused. And when it comes to harnessing then the power of the customer, not just to build our business, but to drive down carbon emissions, it's really, really important that what we offer does two things, really. First of all, it has to overcome obstacles. The customer offer has to overcome the obstacle of inertia. And in financial services, you'll all know this. I mean, people are very sticky much of the time in their financial choices. I think I'm right in saying only 8% of UK customers, when asked, have said that they've changed how they make financial decisions to make them more sustainable. So inertia is one big thing. The second is ignorance. Many people just don't know what their impact is on the environment, what they should do to change it, and how on earth they do it. And then the third is clearly cost. And on the cost, that clearly can be an opportunity. Now, get that all right, and we can build loyalty as we go along. In terms of examples, we're focusing in terms of our retail customers, first and foremost, on providing them with more information about their impact in terms of carbon. And we've partnered up with a startup called Kogo. So you can plug in your Santander account into the Kogo app, and it will tell you how much your transactions are having an impact in terms of carbon, first point. Second, we'll nudge you with little offers here and there to say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And then the third, and this comes back to Mark's point, is about offering them ways to offset. Now, this is early days. We're finding there's a real interest, a great amount of interest, but the more you go down that chain, the more you get into those barriers I mentioned before. So I think we're in the foothills of this. Interestingly, we're also piloting a very similar thing in Chile, very, very similar. That's much more focused on offsetting. Again, proving very popular among younger customers. What's interesting there is that we have Chilean charities that are protecting the environment, so you can give donations directly to those charities, and that's quite interesting because it sort of links the local community to your impact. So that's sort of it on that. That's one example on our retail customers. I just want to pick up though on what Mark Carney was saying. I mean, our other customers are clearly our own internal business units, and I spend, as I know that others do, hours now looking through our investment portfolios and working out how we're going to hit net zero, because we're one of the leading banks to the Net Zero Bankers Alliance. And that is requiring us to get in data, harvest the data, check the validity of the data, and do all of the planning around what that means. That requires an enormous amount of tech, which is, to be honest, we don't have in-house and we will have to bring in. The second thing is on offsets. I think this market is absolutely just ripe to explode. I think that all those companies that I've just mentioned, the big oil majors, the power companies, they're all looking at this right now as to what it is they need to be doing. Big opportunities there. You can see it already emerging in blockchain. Again, we don't have that experience. We're a 167-year-old business. We're very good at changing. We're very good at innovating. But there is going to be big opportunities there. And the third is something, final point is agriculture. We talk about the F's of fossil fuels. Actually, I think it's the F's of food and farming on that previous panel that is now going to be the key issue for so many of us. Yeah. We have very big Brazilian operations, and there again, technology is going to be key. Monitoring carbon impact of agriculture, working out then what yields are, what the insurance risk is, and the credit risk of our farmers. That is something that we are actively exploring. And again, therefore, you get into ag tech and that whole realm there. And that is a big opportunity for collaboration between tech companies, insurers and banks. And so I think it's not just the retail customers, I suppose I'd end by saying, it's right down the chain.
I've got two questions to follow up with there. One is around trust, which is to say that with customers, do you think that you have the necessary trust to persuade them to change their behavior and you need the technology that these companies provide? Or are they going to also bring the trust as well as the technology?
Well, I mean, I'd love to say that I think the brand of Santander will have the trust, but I think that there's a step actually not quite addressed by either of your points. It's whether or not they can actually trust the offsetting in itself. Yes. You know, are we actually doing something? And I'm sorry, I could go on and on, but the offsetting point, you know, I'm a supporter of offsetting, but actually what we want to stop is the harmful behavior in the first place, don't we? So there's that in itself that we need to be thinking towards as the final destination where you're not having to offset, but that's the stage on.
Yeah. I remember a panel that I attended, must be a year and a half, 2 years ago, I'm guessing now, where we were talking about this idea that some of the technological solutions that are out there, even in a company like Santander or SAP, the solutions are deployed to solve a particular problem for a client, and they could easily be transferred to solve an environmental challenge like climate, for example, but a lot of the people that are designing those technologies aren't necessarily aware of some of the key challenges that we as a society need to go after. Have you seen any kind of matchmaking programs, any of you got where I suppose people are coming together around the table, the people that really understand the science and the prioritization of the problems that we face, and the people who've got the capability of solving those things?
Well,
I can
hop in the conversation. Steve has
have you seen that?
There are a few programs out there, but I don't think it's been exploited enough. For sure, in many corporates, what you have is what I would call straight line problem solving.
Yeah.
And you have those goggles on, and you don't get to see what's adjacent, what's to your left or to your right. And that is one of, I think, the major failings of a lot of the locking corporate cultures that we have today, that people are just straight line through. Now, the value of a forum like this, and well done for ClimateTech to putting this on, and Founders Forum, is you get to ventilate a lot more ideas. And I think there could be a great initiative in the future that brings together your FTSE 20, your FTSE 80, with a group of founders, and you do joint problem solving at scale. And we could use technology for that, but I tell you what, I'm quite enjoying this novel thing of meeting in person. I think it could catch on.
I would say, Arlo, we've actually got major motions around this. We call it a huge co-innovation. And actually the interesting thing that we're seeing over the last year and a half is the acceleration of some of the top, like FTSE 50 together with top DAX and top Dow, all coming together to co-innovate, to solve either a common process problem, be it around like traceability that we're talking about, but also to co-invest to go after a particular opportunity. And also a lot of the things that we've been talking about in this panel and also throughout the day also relies on transparency of data. And we all know that we're living in a time when potentially geopolitical macro trust is at an all-time low. But for us to achieve the global goal of net zero, because no nation state or even pan-regional state can achieve this alone, we therefore have to work on transparent data models, and we have big macro questions to answer over who governs that data, who owns that data, who monitors the network of networks, and then how do we balance any potential risk, that insight that can be derived from that data network can then not be weaponized against particular challenges. So I think that a lot of the topics that we're talking about here today, we can't talk about them distinct from the social justice and inclusion agenda as well. But a lot of our co-innovation motions are very much about the biggest companies in the world coming together with startups, with government, with creative thought leaders. I personally was blown away by Thomas's sentiment earlier, to actually address not just these problems, but also some very basic business challenges now, because the future opportunity for a lot of business lies at the intersection of things. And that is the bit that, you know, is also why I'm sure many of us absolutely are stoked about working in this space and being part of it. I think, Leo, you probably want to come in on this.
Can I sound like an old hippie for a moment and say
Well,
I really agree with what you said? Okay, so there's this guy, John Ruskin, who says basically like, you know, there's two ways of looking at the world. One is the only life is wealth, the last century. The other is the only wealth is life. And there's something around this decision, are we going to manage to take off the corporate blinkers, which I suspect all of us have got on? And I don't know if that applies to what percentage of the room, but in the end, what we're solving for is shareholder value plus whatever social or environmental benefits may be squeezed out while wearing those manacles. And let me just throw out this one tiny gift, which is a word I came across, which is a word stigmergic, okay? Stigmergic, which refers to what Wikipedia is and what anyone left to their own devices with a task that they actually give a toss about is, which is they're self-motivated and they'll do it. And that if we were to start actually collaborating around the problems that we know are there, and I quote Fabio Barbosa, the old CEO of Banco Real in Brazil, formerly Santander, a bank is only as healthy as the planet around it is healthy. If we were actually to kind of ingest that truth and to manage to get our corporations actually to focus primarily on those problems, I think there might be an unbelievable amount of collaboration, real collaboration, that would happen, and that type of sharing and that type of co-innovation. But I do not honestly think we are there.
If you look at it, it's slightly off topic, but let's stick with it for a second. I would say this, coming from the B Corp space, do you think we're at nearly at a tipping point of moving from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism, or is that such a long way off?
Can we get a feel of the room? Because everyone's out on this question. Are we?
Put your hands up if you think we're moving towards stakeholder
Well, but that's
capitalism.
too easy a question.
Is
Moving
it?
towards. No one's going to say we're not moving towards. Like, are we at the tipping point?
Give them the question.
Okay,
are we at the tipping point? Hand up if you think we are. No is the answer. No.
Although movements towards it are now being priced.
It's a bit depressing, isn't it?
Did we not get a single no? That was pretty quick. You went in pretty quickly with the no. Did we not? Did no one? Does no one think we're at the tipping point?
Someone put their hand up for
We
Leo.
got one.
I'll put my hand up for the children of today. I think COVID has meant that they have a different social conscience about their future, so 11 to 18-year-olds. So I think the 11 to 18-year-olds of today are the ones that are going to drive us on a journey to a tipping point, because they're not making the same decisions that we've made at their age.
Yes.
You know, they're not choosing to drive and gain their driving license. They have a real awareness of the connection of nature and health and their own well-being. So I think we are not there yet, but I think the next generation will be.
I'm very interested in this response because I think we are approaching a tipping point, and one factual point you can point to is the obvious rise in ESG funds. And just the avalanche of money and the way in which the investor community from Larry Fink on now thinks and interrogates businesses like Santander through the prism of ESG. Now, I'm very interested in the response of the room, because you could say that there is therefore a skepticism about that movement, and maybe people think that it will vanish like snow when we hit an economic crisis. I don't know. Personally, I think it's got deep roots, and I think exactly to your point, I think that customers, especially younger customers, they aren't just going to grow up and become sort of hard-nosed. They're going to stick with this. And the one thing, there are some barriers to it taking root, though, Leo, and it is partly in the financial system in which we're in still, which is very quarterly results-driven, and it is still dictating far too much, not long-term decision-making. And that is one thing that is going to stop us.
I think that's really important.
I would say on this topic, I would say there's that great phrase of, I'm an optimist, but I'm an optimist that worries a lot. So there's a lot to be optimistic about. So if you pick up just one point here, so I'm sure you all tracked this. ExxonMobil were attacked by what could be called an activist fund, engine number one. They had less than, I think, a $40 million holding in a multi-billion-dollar animal, ExxonMobil, and they managed to get 3 significant seats on the board with one of the best written activist letters you'll ever read. It's available on the internet. If you want to know how corporate finance can be influenced by this agenda, read that letter. So that's the optimistic bit, but then I also worry a lot. So I think we're probably about 8-9 years on from when Paul Pullman took over Unilever and made a great speech to say he was ending quarterly shareholder reporting. 8 years on, how many other CEOs have made that brave move to try and catapult us all into more of a long-term value view, to more looking at a stakeholder environment rather than a shareholder environment, just a shareholder environment? Not enough. I think you're right, George. ESG funds, though I do worry about some of the ESG funds, I do worry about them. I think they could make us more optimistic, but maybe a little too much to worry about at the moment as well.
Yeah.
I want to end, we're nearly running out of time. I want to end on a practical note for the audience. So I'm assuming that most of these people come from the tech background, and they're the kind of people that are looking to partner with big business. You've got a great helicopter view in your role at EY and with the S30 and what have you of looking. Have you got any advice to these guys in terms of, so not all partnerships work by any stretch of the imagination, as Leo's telling us. How do you sort, where have you seen success? What are the indicators of success that these guys should look out for when partnering with big companies? And how can they tell whether a company is in category 1, 2, or 3? I think it was they were all negative. 4 was the
3 was good.
3 was good.
Great question. Then maybe I should say this, it's also delightful to be on a panel where you don't have to every now and again go, you're on mute. Isn't that nice? So that's a nice sort of revelation, isn't it? And apologies for the legs. My wife said to me this morning, if you've heard that phrase, a good face for radio, she said you've got good legs for trousers, which I think is a kind of a comparable thing, really. But more seriously to your very good question. Well, simplistically, there's a simple test that we would advise anybody to do in creating a relationship, a business relationship, an acquisition, a transaction, a merger, a collaboration. There's that great phrase that Peter Drucker invented many decades ago when he said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you can have a strategic discussion. You can talk about business return, exits, how this is going to work in practice. There's a really simple way to work out whether your relationship will work, which is move in. Ask for a space for at least a week. Ask for space in a building for a week, for 2 weeks, for a little bit longer. Watch how management treats staff. Watch how they treat the person that opens the door. Watch how they talk to the people and make you coffee in the morning. Culture is your beliefs. It's the way of working. If you don't have a cultural affiliation, I wouldn't go as far to say as alignment, you should be bringing something really valuable to the organization that won't be in alignment, but there should be an affiliation. If you walk out on a Friday evening, you've got a smile on your face and you think, I could be part of this lot, then you've got a deal. If you can't do that, turn around and run and don't look back because it won't work.
That is fabulous advice, and it comes from, it's something that resonates. I remember that quote from my business school days, and I'm often, as a consultant, it always amazes me. I think you can tell within 15 minutes of being in a building of one of these big corporates, whether it's a culture that you feel like you could align with or not. It's difficult to describe exactly how you make that decision, but you can tell from the person at the door and from the reception person, etc. You can get a feel for that company really, really quickly. So I think that's great advice.
That's great. I'll bring it alive with another little example. It's one of my old mentors used to do. A fabulous woman, is now chair of a major FTSE firm. She used to go into the lobby of a bigger building, the corporate environment that you may walk into. And she, it's a bit sneaky, used to drop a bit of litter on the floor. Then she's going to take her seat and watch people walk past the litter or pick up the litter. And she used to count. And then she used to come in and go, about 200 people, or about 2 people. How many people walked past the litter? How many people picked it up? Now in her set of values, you pick up the litter. I walk through lobbies in my organization and I pick up litter. And people watch you. And then suddenly you create a cultural shift where we all care about small matters. So that might be another test for you. As you walk into a big corporate, leave something behind. See what happens to it. See if it's treated well and respectfully. See if you'd like to live there, work there. If not, run.
I'd also say look at what data models they can give you access. They can get access to lots of actionable data to be also very practical about collaborating with tech and industry insight. I think that's very useful too, because not all big companies are created the same. But I'm sure that Banco Santander could give unique insight on banking process that could then be reapplied in a different context. And certainly it's the same in our case. So I really would add that too, because if I was pitching, that is what I'd look at first.
Unfortunately, we're all out of time. I was going to give it, like, I think that's a great example, and it reminds me of when I was at school. I had a fishing line and a pound coin that I had stuck with super glue to the fishing line. And I remember throwing it down the corridor and watching for who'd come and pick up the pound coin. But anyway, it's another topic altogether. Thank you very much for being with us, panel. I hope you enjoyed that. I think some of us will be staying around. Hopefully we haven't put you off partnering with big business. There are lots of great big businesses out there that really need support from people like you and organizations like yours. So everyone needs to get stuck into this challenge because it really is huge. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.